Again, welcome to this series of classes on Purim and Pesach. Technically speaking, it's called Geula Legula, Redemption to Redemption, after the book that I wrote as well, based upon our Gemara, that actually applies very much to this year, because this year is a leap year, and the Gemara asked the question in Megillah on Vav Amud Beis, what to do in this situation. You have two Adars. We have Parashat that we read in advance of Purim, and those after Purim in advance of Pesach, 4 altogether. And how should you do it? Should you put it in the first Adar, the second Adar? Why is there an issue? What's the discussion? Because basically that we have a concept called Ein Marvin ala Mitzvahs, and that is you do a mitzvah the first chance you have. Because we all know what happens. We all know how easy it is to get distracted, how easy it is for things to come and go, and to forget, to do something, or we get interrupted. Even we don't forget, but an interruption occurs, something. So that's hashgacha pratis, it's a divine providence. But the main point is that a mitzvah comes to your hand. You have to be a zaris, you have to be a zealot to do it as soon as possible. So technically speaking, it really makes more sense, according to halachic principles, to actually do Purim, the holiday itself, and the mitzvahs surrounding Purim, the Parashat, the Maftir of Torahs, in the first Adar, because that's the first opportunity that we have. The Gemara says, no, we're not going to do it that way. Why? A concept that's called Mesamach Geula Legeula. Now, the truth is, it's not really a halachic principle. It's more like an inyan, more like a matter, so to speak. So it's kind of like unusual that a matter would push off the halachic principle of Ein Marvin ala Mitzvahs. We don't pass over a mitzvah. But the Gemara is a reason for it. The Gemara says because we want to have the Geula of Purim close to Pesach. It's more important that Purim be 30 days in advance of Pesach than it be in the first Adar, even though that's the first opportunity to be able to celebrate it. And then you have to understand why that's the case. So that's what the book talks about. And this series of classes is named after that. And therefore, this is in loving memory of Yaakov Azriel ben Aaron David and Sima Zal, Ili Neshama for him, and a source of bracha for the entire family. I have a friend that for years we have been signing off our letters and discussions by saying Purim Samech. It doesn't make a difference which year it is, doesn't make a difference which month it is, all year round, because we have looked at history pretty much the same way, meaning that we see things upside down. We don't see upside down, but the world history seems to be upside down. And that's even before today. That's before the last couple of years, 5, 10 years. This goes back a long time. And it was our way of acknowledging that it's all divine providence, it's all part of the Gula process, it's all part of the hashkafa and hashgacha, etc., and that things are unfolding in that direction. And certainly since the Twin Towers were destroyed, and history's gone on a whole different path. So it's as funny as it was, and some of it even seems a little strange to do it, but for the most part, it was very, very true. And we have to understand why. Because it turns out that even though Purim is a rabbinic holiday that did not come along to much later on in history, like Hanukkah, which came later, that it was always meant to be. Purim was always meant to be. The reality of Purim was always meant to be, meaning that it's built into creation. And the fact that it came out later on in history, and that the Rabbanim were the ones who established it, nevertheless, it's midaraisa in as much as that this is what God intended. And he gave us the opportunity to be part of that unfolding of history and the Chagim itself. And just to show you how true this really is, that there are 10 Sphirot. Now, what's a Sphirot? That's a discussion to itself. It's Kabbalah. It's pure Kabbalah. The essence of Kabbalah, the meat and potatoes of Kabbalah are the Sphirot. The Sphirot, in a sense, are like cosmic DNA. There are 10 of them, and they basically span between the uppermost reality of God that we know of, what we call the Or Ein Sof, the unlimited light of God, and creation, the lowest of levels, which is our level that we live on, the physical world. You can't get any more distant from God than being physical. God is so not physical, and the world is so physical that there's a big gap between the two of us. And again, these are all discussions that are important to have. We had some before in the past, And I got quite a few books on it, and lots of people have written books about this, but that's not the main point right now. The main point right now is that you have these 10 spheres, and very briefly, their Hebrew names are from the top down: Keser, Chachma, Bina, some put Das in there. Then you have Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, and Malchus. These are the 10 spheres, and they act kind of like cosmic DNA for history. Now, there's the potential that we require to exist physically and to live and to breathe and just to have all of creation be in existence requires some basis of flow from God. The moment God stops allowing his light to come down anywhere, that thing ceases to exist immediately, on the spot. Not even time to decay. That's it. It's over. So these spheres act as a way of God filtering his light so that the spiritual and non-physical can eventually result in the physical that we're used to. And it's the way that he implements his will for creation. That's the idea, basically. That's what the spheres are. Very complicated topics, ideas. If we were having only discussion about this, then we could talk about it in more detail, but I'm not going there right now. Now, what's important to know is that the 7 lowest spheres, they basically govern our period of history, specifically from the 7th down. That's the last one, the Malchus, also is the world that we live in, but this the DNA, so the cosmic DNA, so to speak, of our history, our reality, is really the 6 spheres of Chesed through Yesod. I realize this is confusing and it's hard to follow. It's the end, the punchline that counts over here. The upper 3 spheres of Keser, Chachma, and Bina, which literally means crown and wisdom and understanding. Those are the 3 over there. We don't have much access to them right now. We don't have any access, really. It's mostly a hidden access at this point in time. And they're really for the world to come. They're the basis of the world to come. That's when we'll finally have the light of that time. Now, it's brought down that the holidays eventually will be batal. Eventually, the holidays that we're used to will no longer be holidays anymore. So what happens? They just disappear altogether? No, you have to understand that the basis of a holiday is like a pipeline, meaning that the light of Pesach and the light of Shavuot and the light of Sukkot and the light of Hanukkah and the light of Purim and the light of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, even Shabbos, is a light that belongs to a different time period. Even though we access it right now, but it's from a different time period. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to have a holiday. It would just be the reality every single day. So, for example, the first holiday to be canceled out, to be batal, is Hanukkah. And when does it happen? Yemos HaMashiach, in the Messianic era. Why? Because the light of Hanukkah belongs to the Messianic era. It's the light of what we're going to see every single day in Yemos HaMashiach. So in the meantime, we need a holiday to access that light. So on the 25th day of Kislev every year for 8 days, a window opens up, a spiritual window opens up to the future, Yemos HaMashiach. And the light of Yemos HaMashiach comes down to us. And we can gain from it, we can access it as a result of that. So in a sense, every Hanukkah, when you celebrate Hanukkah properly and you understand this and you take advantage of the opportunity, in a sense, you're living out on some level the Messianic era, even though we're still in exile. Shabbos too. Shabbos is 1/60th of the world to come. It really belongs to the period of history from 6,000 to 7,000, the first stage of the world to come. So that's why every Shabbos, there's the opportunity, if you do it right, and I mean right, and not just mean like take a day off and feast and serve yourself, but you actually understand what's going on and you do use the day properly, which should be a shir unto itself, at least if not many, then you can access the light of the world to come. So the next holidays to be batal are Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, and even Rosh Chodesh will be a holiday at some point in time. They'll also be canceled out. When is that going to take place? In the later stage of the Messianic era called Techiyas HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. And as Elishem explains, Rav Shlomo Eliashiv, whose Yurtzeit was actually just yesterday, actually 2 days at this point in time, he explains that what's going to happen is that every Sunday will be Pesach, but no Pesach cleaning because there's no Chumash, there's no Yitzhahara. It's just the reality of Pesach itself, the pleasure of Pesach. It's a different light. Every Monday, which is a day of Din, will be Rosh Hashanah. Those holidays will occur in Techis HaMeisim as regular days of the week. So you won't need one particular holiday to access that light. And then comes the 7th millennium, from 6,000 to 7,000, and Shabbos is no more. Because every day, Yom Shekulo Shabbos, we'll be living in a millennium that the light of Shabbos will shine every single day. So therefore, that's why Shabbos is bought at that point in time. And then from 7,000 to 8,000, Yom Kippur stops being a holiday, which means that in the from 6,000 to 7,000, it was still a holiday. In Techis HaMeisim, the resurrection of the dead, it was still a holiday, because you need a special day to access that light, because it's not shining every single day. But from 7,000 to 8,000, then that light will be the light of that millennium, Yom Kippur. And as a result of that, you won't need a special day for Yom Kippur, because it will be Yom Shechlu, Yom Kippur, every single day. And then, of course, you get to the from 8,000 to 9,000, which correspond to the Sphirot of Chachma. And the last remaining holiday will finally be batel, will finally be canceled out, because that light will shine every single day. And which holiday is that? It's Purim, the light of Purim. But Purim, interesting enough, Pesach was already batel a couple thousand years ago, whatever that means at that time of history. Yom Kippur was already batel before. Chanukah was the first to go. All the major chagim that we celebrate, the rices, Torah Torah mitzvah holidays, they're all gone. They're all over. But Purim, the last holiday to be batel, to finally be over, is going to be Purim, and it corresponds to the Sphirot Chachma, which is so counterintuitive. Because when you consider what Purim is, it's a holy day for sure. I mean, Chazal say Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim is Yom Kippur, but Yom Kippurim is another way of saying Yom Kippur. And they darshan out, they elucidate Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. What? First of all, you fast. So the entire day in prayer, and you're toning, and the whole thing, is like, and Purim is like, it's completely the opposite. Literally, more than any other holiday, Purim is the complete opposite. The complete opposite. Well, that says a lot. That tells us a tremendous amount right off the bat. Because basically it's telling us that what we see and what is are two entirely different things. Or they shouldn't be, but unfortunately, that's the way they become, because we tend to oversimplify everything. We tend to go by what seems most apparent to us. But if we've learned anything at all from Jewish history, and anything at all from Torah and mitzvahs and everything, it's that nothing is what it seems to be on the surface. And if something seems to be this way, especially when it comes to Torah and mitzvahs, you have to ask, is that really the true reality? Is that what now? Or is there a lot more here than meets the eye? There are 4 mitzvahs of Purim, which we'll talk about not in this session, B'ezras Hashem, but the next session. And they correspond, interestingly enough, to the 4 letters of Hashem's name, Yud, K, Vav, K. The holiest name that we have of God is Yud, K, Vav, K. We don't even pronounce it today the way it's spelled. It's so holy. And the 4 mitzvahs of Purim, which are only D'Rabbanan, only rabbinical in origin, right? They correspond to these letters. And even more so, even more interesting is the fact that these 4 letters and these 4 mitzvahs correspond to the 4 areas of the Mishkan. Because you have the Kodesh Kodeshim, and then you have the Kodesh after that, the sanctuary, right? And then you have the Chatzer, which surrounds the Mishkan, inside the tent itself. And then you have outside the tent, the everyday world where the Jewish people camped. And these correspond to 4 areas of reality, 4 concepts of reality. Very deep. It's very, very deep. So rather than, do what we've done in the past, where we build a whole shir and go from concept to concept. I'd like to look at a couple ideas specifically and ask some questions. I'm not so sure we'll answer all the questions, and in this case, I'm not so sure it's important to answer all the questions, because I think in this case, the answers themselves are really, the questions themselves are really the answers in the end. If you think about them and you work on them, but we'll do what we can. Try to put things in perspective as Rosh Hashanah in advance of Purim, so we can have a much greater experience of what Purim has to offer us, especially since, as we see from the Gemara, we put Purim close to Pesach because Purim is the hachana for Pesach. It's the preparation for Pesach, not just because it's to clean up after all the Mashiach Manas that got messed up all over the house in advance of Pesach, but because whatever Purim came to teach us, that's what we need for to be able to leave, to become free people in the ultimate sense of the term on Pesach. So the first thing I want to talk about is what I would call Exhibit A. Okay. The Gemara makes a very interesting statement. The Gemara says, it's brought down in Halacha, it says, Mechayev einash lebesumi b'Purim. Literally, a person is obligated to drink on Purim, wine, hard beverages, things like that. It's not really, the Indian really is wine specifically, right? B'Purim. Adil yad ben arahamen leborach Mordechai. I mean, okay. A person has to drink to the point on Purim, until they no longer know the difference between cursed Haman and blessed Mordechai. Now, anybody who's ever got drunk knows that even the worst, you have to basically be unconscious. To get to this point, you have to be literally unconscious or close to being unconscious. Almost you walk in the streets of Purim and you find someone who has already had too much to drink, and you ask them, hey, do you know who Haman was and who Mordechai was? And more than likely, they can answer the question correctly. They might add some funny stuff in the meantime, but they know, they understand. It's a lot of drinking to get to that point, which is very unusual, because normally Judaism does not promote that type of awareness, that lack of awareness. We're all about das. We're all about clarity. And on Yom Kippur, if we're saying Yom Kippurim, and this is Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. The whole point of Purim is to get to the point of Hashem Elokim. We end up Yom Kippur after 26 hours of fasting and davening and pouring our hearts out to Hashem. We end up by saying Hashem Hu Elokim. Hashem Hu Elokim. Why? Because basically that's the level we're going to get to. We say it 7 times to correspond to the 7 layers of heaven, the Shemaim, that Hashem came down to us during the entire 40 days from Elul until the end of Yom Kippur. And that's the ultimate madriga to get to, where you recognize Hashem Elokim. That's very important, because that's basically saying, Paro said, Mi Hashem. Moshe says, you better let us go, because God's he's gonna give it to you, but good. And Paro says, Mi Hashem. Elokim, Rashi says he believes him. I believe there's a God that made the world. I believe there's a God that brought the flood. But he works b'derech teva. So the Gematria of Elokim is a hateva. But Hashem, who interferes in history and runs everything, even nature, that I'm not familiar with. And therefore, I'm not shaking in my boots, because I believe in teva, and I'm the one who's strong here, b'derech teva, and therefore you can't go anywhere, and I don't have to listen to you. So Moshe says, well, you're about to find out who Hashem actually is. So the whole thing we're trying to achieve on Yom Kippur is Hashem Elokim, to get to the point where we realize that everything that happens, but derech teva, in a way, it takes us time to figure it after the fact. But nonetheless, the reality is that it's all Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, even the teva, even the nature. And here we're saying just the opposite. Not just that. On top of the whole point of learning Torah is to learn the difference between good and evil. We tell our kids whom they can play with, because we don't want them learning the wrong things. You have to be able to distinguish between tov and ra. And now we're saying to get to a point where you no longer can distinguish between tov and ra, And why is it an obligation anyhow? What's this line? Chiyu. Chayiv is usually a word that's used for a Torah obligation. A minhag, a strong minhag. It's like you're obligated to such an extent to drink to this point. And the word bisumi, right? The word bisumi means in this case to drink. But if you read the note over here, right, the word actually means incense. We saw it a few, in Parashat Kisisa, for example, we're talking about the incense altar is called midbach besuma, right? That's the incense offering, which there are two altars, right? There was the main altar outside the Mishkan in the Chatzar, the courtyard, where the animal sacrifices took place. And then there was the incense altar inside the Kodesh, inside the sanctuary, which is the menorah, the shulchan with the lechem apanim, the showbreads were on the right-hand side, the menorah is to the south, and then you had the entryway, you had the small little, golden mizbeach, which was for ketoras, for incense offering. And as the Gemara points out, the Gemara asks the question, Esther min Torah manayin, Mordechai min Torah manayin, Haman min Torah manayin, right? Where do we see allusions to these people in the Chumash? Because the Torah is the blueprint for creation, so they got to be there somewhere. So the Gemara says, where's Mordechai? I mean, who says he has to be? But according to the Gemara, he has to be. Gemara wants to know, where is Mordechai alluded to in the Torah? So the Gemara says right there in the Besamim, in the incense. There's 11 incenses used for the actual composition to make the Torah prescribed incense offering, which you cannot duplicate. And one of them was called Mar Dror, which is like the word Mordechai, like actually literally means master of freedom. Interesting enough, Mar is master, Dror is freedom, right? Mar Dror is a I think it's mirror or something like that. You look it up, English translation, and there were 70 manas of it. You had to use 70, portions of this in the mixture. Specifically, it's a very specific mixture to burn a specific way, and 70, of course, is a very big number by Purim. I mean, the odds of this happening coincidentally are astronomical. But as to whether or not it means something, that's another story. It's actually the Purim story. Because 70 is the number that governs the entire holiday of Purim. Why? Because God told Daniel, he told Yeshaya, he told Yechezkel, he told Yirmiyahu, he told all the Nevi'im that the Jewish people were going to be exiled, but after 70 years, he'd come get us. He'd redeem us again. So we're in Babylonia, and all these kings who believe in God, even including Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the base of Mikdash, they believe in the Kodesh Baruch, and they believe in the prophecy. So they're all waiting to see when the 70 years are up. But interesting enough, the beginning of the 70 years is a mystery. So no one knows officially when it ends. So all these kings, of Persia, the Media, they're all making calculations when the 70 years are over, the Gemara says, and they miss it. They make a mistake and they die as a result of that. So 70 figures very strongly in all of this. Not just that, but we'll see that wine, of course, is the centerpiece of Purim, and the Gematria, the numerical value of the word yain, is 70. Yud Nut, right? And as the Gemara points out, we'll see the next source, Exhibit B, so to speak, right? That it's not just that, but the Gematria word sod, which means secrets, or secret, right, is also Gematria of 70. So the Gemara concludes and says, yayin yotze sod. When wine goes in, secrets come out. Now, obviously, people blab a lot. You give a person enough wine, you can get the secrets of life out of them, basically, their lives, because they lose their boundaries, the ability to think logically and to understand and feel the consequences of what they're saying. So that people spill their guts, unfortunately, when they drink wine. Too much of it, too much alcohol. But the Gemara is not talking about those sodas. It's not talking about those secrets. In fact, the Kli Yakar says in Parshas V'yishlach, when the angel of Esav, whose name is Samael, and explains because of the fact is made up to two parts, Sam and Kel, right? Because he blinds us the reality of Kel, the reality of Shem. He blinds the mind eye. Now, how does he do it? Different levels. But when he tried to destroy Yaakov's Torah by going after his body, because the body represents Torah, and he couldn't do it, he went after the legs. he touched him the back of the leg. As a result of that, we don't need to get a nasha, the sinew, the back of the calf, the cow's leg, because of this whole incident, according to what the Torah says. There's deeper things to it, obviously, but that's what it says. And why did he go after the leg? Because the Gemara says, just like the leg is hidden, so are the Sphirot Torah hidden, the secrets of Torah, which of course amounts to Kabbalah. So basically, the Sitra Achra, which is the angel of Esav, whose name we just mentioned before, right? His whole thing is to attack the sword of Torah, because he can't really undermine Torah itself. Some people he can, but overall, you see, Baruch Hashem, thousands of years later, over 3,300 years later, we still have yeshivas. I mean, they're trying to undo that, but they won't, because Baruch Hu finds a way to keep it going anyhow. After thousands of years, we're still doing it. That's the body of Torah. But Kabbalah, the secrets of Torah, it's not a story. It's those secrets of Torah that put everything into perspective, that allow us to rise above the everyday reality. Now, the 11 spices are not incidental. Why 11 specifically? Because 11 is a number that goes back to creation itself, to Ma'aseh Bereshis itself. 11 is a number that represents a concept called das, Daled Ayin Tav. Now, das in general just means knowledge. Like, a person becomes bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, becomes a bar das or a bas das. They have das now. They can make decisions, and therefore they can learn Torah and do mitzvahs, right? But das is more than that in this case. Das represents a whole different concept altogether. It represents a higher level of understanding and knowledge. So already that's revising the statement. Already there's a change taking place over here. It sounds like you have to drink to the point that you don't know. But now we're finding out that the word besumi, which means incense, and alludes to the das, alludes to the kataris, which alludes to the incense, which alludes to the das, means you have to drink to the point to get das. So now you have what we call an internal contradiction, astira mineu be, meaning that the first part of the statement seems to imply the whole point of the drinking is to get to the level of a high level of das. And the second part of the statement seems to be implying just the opposite. So how does that work together? That's what we have to see. But we have to point out as well that the lashon of besumi, which is often used in Kabbalah to mean to scent something, to make something smell good, because it's incense, right? It's like besaming. It's like, it could be like a perfume, for example, right? Or cologne. Those are also besaming. But Kabbalah uses the term, bisum, because of the fact that when you take the evil of creation, or you take the potential for evil, that we call the gevurahs, like the strong, light that can result in judgment, result in evil, result in Asa, for example. You take the potential and you use it for good instead. You find a way to incorporate that specific light and koyach into your avodas Hashem, your serving of God. You have done what's called sweetening the gevurahs. You made it more like chesed, so to speak. And because of that, you get rewarded. In fact, the reward in the world to come that a person earns is all the gevurahs, all those lights that could have been used for evil, and they instead use them for good. It rectifies the person, it rectifies the world, and that becomes a person's reward in the world to come. So the fact that this statement in the Gemara, a simple statement, just, they throw it in, like literally, it just happened to say it like this. And yet every word is so crucial and so important, so instructive. And this is telling you right here that the whole point of the drinking is not just to get to the das, but it's to rectify yourself and to rectify the world. A person is obligated to drink to the point on Purim, whatever that means, is what the drinking means in the end, but to the point where they rectify themselves, they rectify the world, they sweeten the gevurahs, and they get to the level of das. Well, now we understand why it says chayev, because that's not just a Purim obligation. That's the point of life. That's what we're here to accomplish. That's what we're here to achieve. Now we have to see from the second part of the statement what that actually means. So if you think about it, or just recall, you go back to the beginning, right? And you think about the entire thing, you'll realize that basically the whole creation of Amalek, because the Gemara says, Hamin minator menayin, it says, Hamin ha'etz, did you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? God was looking for Adam Arishon and says, where are you? And he says, I hid. And he says, why did you hide? Because I'm not wearing clothing. I didn't feel like I was dressed for the occasion. So therefore, God says, how would you know anything like that? Hamin ha'etz, right? Did you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? So Gemara plays in the word Hamin, meaning Hamin. It's spelled the same way. It's just the interrogative of mean. Hamin, did you eat, right? From, did you? But here they're saying, no, that's really Hamin. So is it just to play in the word, or is it actually telling you the conceptual reality? Well, it's telling you the conceptual reality, basically. It's not just telling you that the word Hamin is like the word Hamin, but it's telling you that the creation of Hamin, which is basically Amalek, came from the eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What does that mean? It means that until Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, they didn't know Tov Ra. They didn't know the difference between Tov and Ra. Why? Because they lived on the level of Emes v'Sheker. On the original state of existence, they only knew truth and falsehood, black and white, absolutes. Tov v'Ra, good and evil, can be subjective. One person's idea of good is another person's idea of evil, and vice versa. It's only once they ate. I mean, the Torah makes it sound like they gained something. And now they know the difference between Tov and Ra. They put on clothing because of the whole situation. Unless they eat the tree of life, also, therefore, I'm going to kick them out of the garden and push them into exile for thousands of years. It was no mitzvah. It was no great thing to learn the difference between Tov and Ra. On the contrary, all it did was create confusion and create something called safek, doubt. Doubt was the result of eating from the Eitz Hadas. Before that, they had no doubts. They didn't need to wear clothing because there was no issue of abusing anything in creation, let alone each other. There was just pure serving of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, using everything the way it was meant to be used. The moment they ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, realized that they had free will that could allow them to abuse creation. You know what it's like. You know, your mind starts thinking, and I don't want to think like that, but it's in there, and a person wears down after a while. You know, you're on a diet, or you just don't want to eat some type of food, you know, and you think, I don't touch things like that. It's amazing how you can come in, you can see a piece of cake on the table, and say, that doesn't, I don't want that cake right now. And you sit there long enough for an hour, get a little hungry after a while, and the cake starts looking healthy. You know, and before you know it, you know, you have an appetite for it, and you eat it. And you walk away going, it's amazing. When I first came in, I didn't want that cake. And now, you know, just by being safek. The Yetzer Hara can only get a person where there's safek, where there's doubt. So, in a sense, what this is telling you, not that you shouldn't learn the difference between Tov and Ra, between cursed Haman and blessed Mordechai. It's telling you to reverse the whole thing. To not get to a point of oblivion where you're like literally out to lunch about what's right and what's wrong. No, that's never a Torah thing. There's never an excuse. When you die, that's enough already. At that point, you won't know, that's fine. But while you're living, you have to know the difference. Otherwise, you make mistakes. Even if it's for just one day. Because in one day, a person can lose their whole portion of what they come if you do something wrong enough. Just an Avodah Zorah thought can do that. Torah is not telling you to lose your das. The Torah is telling you to reverse to chetz, to go back to pre-Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, to go back to the level of absolutes, up the level of true and false, where Hashem Elokim, where literally Elokim stops being Elokim, because in the Gar David there was no Elokim, there was only Hashem, because it was that clear. Just like in Yemos Mashiach, by Yamahu, and in the Yemos Mashiach, the Messianic era, when the Yetzer is finally cleared away, and there's no doubt anymore, you won't need Hashem Elokim, because it's clearly Hashem is everything, and life just becomes more miraculous as time goes on. So this is telling you that the whole point of Purim is to reverse the chet of the Eitz Das Tov Ra. That's what we're trying to achieve, to get to the level of Das. And on that level, there really is no difference anymore between Ara Haman and Baruch Mordechai. But let's ask the question, since we're here anyhow, right? Why add the word Arur? Why add the word Baruch? Why is it not enough just to say Adil Yada bein Haman and Mordechai? We know what we're talking about. What's Dafka, the cursed Haman and the blessed Mordechai? It's like we're going to extremes over here. If you only say Haman and Mordechai, we know between good and evil, the bad guy and the good guy. And also, why do we mention the bad guy first before the good guy? But here, we add the words Arur and Baruch, and the interesting thing happens when you do that. All of a sudden, the Gematrias become the same. The Gematria of Ara Haman and Baruch Mordechai, it's quite fascinating because now you can always make a Gematria work out by adding eating more chillent, as they say, right? You can add more letters, find another word, you don't have to connect. And there's like, sometimes you find Gematrias in the Arizal that are just incredible. Like, where did that come from? It could only have come from Eliyahu or Moshe Rabbeinu or somebody who had prophecy, because who in the world would think of making Gematria as that equals that? But here, the words literally are matim. Arur and Baruch are opposite from each other. And yet you put them together in the right place like this, and all of a sudden the Gematrias are exactly equal, 502. Incidentally, the Gematria of Adar is 205, but that just means that all of them have the same Gematria cut, of 25, which of course, you remember from Hanukkah, alludes to the Oreganus and the light of creation. I mean, this has nerves going out in all different directions. This is like literally an epicenter with ideas this way, that way, this way. It's like so incredibly connected. It's Chachma, the Sphirot Torah, the secrets of Torah, absolutely fantastic. But by making them equal to each other, right? It's like putting them on a scale. They're both equal to 502. They weigh the same. But this is Arur Haman, this is Baruch Mordechai. You can't get it any more opposite, and yet they're equal. Well, how do they become equal? Very simple. One God, one power, one puppeteer running the entire show. He sent Amalek to attack us before Torah was given. Well, the Jewish people asked the question, is God amongst us or not? Do we have water? Those who've gone to my site, the Shar Nun site, where I've been uploading chapters from the Leshem, you will find a section called Alilas, an essay on Alilas, where the Leshem explains that everything that the Torah gives a reason for why it happened. For example, that Amalek attacked because the Jewish people asked the question, Hayesh Hashem b'Kabena im ayin, and that's a whole Kabbalistic statement right there, is not really the real reason. It's a pretext. It's all pretext. Really, God has another deeper level of divine providence at work over here. He wanted Amalek to attack the Jewish people there in Refidim, in advance of Torah being given, which is why Haman attacks the Jewish people here, important time, in advance of Kabbalah Torah Part 2. Because as the rabbis point out, that Purim is really just Mount Sinai Part 2. We only accepted the written law, B'Ahava, and Purim time, we finally accepted the oral law by Ahava. So really, Purim is like two bookends. Har Sinai over here, Purim over here, and guess who attacks each time before? Amalek. And Amalek, of course, is Suffolk. Somehow you have to have this reality of Suffolk, of doubt, in advance of Kabbalah Torah, which, it makes perfect sense if you think about it, because the whole point of Torah is to clarify everything. But anybody who's done Kiruv, Rechokim, anybody who has ever tried to Makar somebody who's not interested in being Makarved, right? And you try to talk with them, they're not interested. They don't believe you have anything to talk about. So you learn, over time, just to be able to ask the right question. Just do me a favor, just answer me this one question. And you give them the question, and all of a sudden you see the mind work. They never thought about it before. They never considered it before. And all of a sudden they realized that perfect world of clarity they thought they were living in, not so clear at all in the end. And all of a sudden, one question can lead to a second question, which leads to a third question, and a fourth question, et cetera, the entire way through. And that's when you finally decide to come back for class. I've seen it with my own eyes, where somebody showed up at a class a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth time. And when I asked him, I thought, whoa, didn't see you coming back ever again. Why'd you come back? Well, that question that he asked, or that she asked, with the Shabbos table that was asked, it bugged me. It nagged me, and I had no answer for it. So I figured if you're asking the question, you must have an answer for it. And the answer led to another question. That's what you find out. And in fact, we'll see by the Seder table, right? The whole thing revolves around 4 questions that really we don't directly answer so much. We don't really say, well, here's the answer to that question. We just go through the whole story after that. Because the questions themselves, if you can get to the point you can ask the question, as they used to say to us at exam time, just repeating the question is 2/3 of the answer. I wasn't quite sure how that fraction worked out to be, but that's what they would tell you. The idea was that you're already halfway there, at least. If you just reword the question, somehow the answer flows from that. Not always, but in this case, very much so. Not because you have the answer, but it will lead to the answer, especially once you factor in Siyata D'Shmaya, heavenly help, because God says you're asking the questions. That's what he wants to do. I learned this, in an interesting way a long time ago, that it's not our job to answer the questions. It's our job to ask the questions. That's what we have to do. God, he's got the answers, all the answers, and he gives those answers to us in so many different, interesting ways. But if we can get to the point where we can ask the question, we recognize we have doubt. We need that doubt. It humbles us. It's machnia us. It opens us up. So that's why the Jewish people had to meet Amalek along the way to Mount Sinai. They could never have received Torah on the level that they did had Amalek not attacked first. And likewise, the Jewish people could not have accepted Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral law, by Purim time if Haman hadn't attacked first. And for all we know, that the confusion that we're experiencing today, because that's one overriding factor of today that I personally see and have heard from other people too. It's a very confusing time between coronavirus, what's going on right now with Russia and Ukraine, what's happened before, what's happened in the elections with the falls, all of it. It's just, things used to be so mitzudar, so in order, so logical, so pleasant. And all of a sudden, it's like things are happening we cannot believe. Just doesn't make sense to us. What's going on? That confusion alone may be the biggest simon and sign that what we need, that we're literally at the end. Because any time that the history, especially the Jewish people, get to a point of suffix, they're being attacked by Amalek, which could be any form. Even scientists who come along and tell you, we can prove that God doesn't exist. He's not necessary. You don't have to think about him. That's Amalek. It's Amalekian. And think anybody who does that, by definition, is taking an Amalekian approach to history. And if that becomes rampant, you could be sure there's going to be an emanation of Torah at some point in the near future. But you have to be a Mordechai. See, Mordechai understood that. And Haman felt it. The Pri Tzedek explains that's why Haman built his eights 50 amas high. It corresponds to what we call the Nun Shar Bina, the 50 gates of understanding, which play a major role in the story of Purim, which is all brought down in my book, Redemption to Redemption, right? That he understood. So to try to counteract the inflow of divine light that was destined to happen at Purim time, he tried to hang Mordechai because he saw that Mordechai was the point guy. He was the point man. He was the one through whom it was all going to happen because he was standing out so much and took a leadership role. So therefore, he tried to stop him with an 850 amas high. In the end, Baruch Hashem, it was for him and his sons and the Torah Shebaal Peh that God promised us flowed into the world and took place. But here we are now facing another Purim and a double Adar, right? 2 Adars, not just because there was a leap month. That's the technical reality. but it's a bolstering of the light of Hashem. According to the Pri Tzaddik, according to Chazal, really, Shovavim, which begins with Shmos, then Be'era, and we go to after that we Parshas Bo, then B'Shalach, and Yisro, and Mishpatim, and some add Truma and Tetzav after that, take us to Purim, because it's all about the light of redemption, beginning with Parshas Shmos. We've been building towards Pesach since Parshas Shmos. We have an extra Adar. That's extra light for a very special year, a Shemitah year, which the Gemara says a war in a Shemitah year, very easily can result in Ben David coming in Motzi Shemitah year. And voices of redemption in the 60 before that, a lot of the components are falling into place, including all the confusion. Purim this year was a very special opportunity to get to the point of Hashem Hu Elokim. We understand it's all one God. That's what this is telling you. A person has to drink wine, meaning a person has to get to the level of das. Wine helps. Hopefully we'll see why. Wine is the vehicle, but the goal is to get not to the point where you're so in a stupor and you can't answer the question, that every child can answer from Cheder onward, right? Not that. On the contrary, to get to the point where you're so clear about the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you understand that Hashem sent Haman and Hashem created Mordechai. If you think those are my words, they're not. Koheles Rabbah says very specifically, it spells it all out. It was Nigzar from the beginning, from creation. There had to be a Avraham, there had to be a Noach, there had to be a Teva. There was a time to go into Gan Eden, and there was a time to go out of Gan Eden. And the Gemara, the Medrash says in Tanchuma, that Adam HaRishon said to Kosh Baruch Hu, if you didn't mean for death to come into the world, so why are there halachas of death in your Torah, which was by you for 2,000 years, long before you even made me? And the Malach HaMavis, angel of death, was already made on the second day of creation. Clearly, death was meant to come into the world, and I'm just the fall guy here. Well, that's true. All of it. Right down to this moment. All since Maaseh Bereshis. We have free will because we don't know that. We don't know how it happens, what it was until after it finally took place and occurred. So now we have to figure out what to do with it. Because ultimately speaking, what Purim teaches you, and this is what the whole story of Mordechai is all about, is that recognizing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing when he's doing it, and more importantly, realizing that crisis means opportunity. That's where Mordechai was heads and shoulders above everybody else. Everybody else was scared, shaking their boots, worried, wondering. But Mordechai said, nah, if this is happening, Hashem must be bringing the Gula. And if he's bringing the Gula, he's going to want volunteers. He's going to want leaders. He's going to want people who seize the moment and the opportunity. That's going to be me. And he fell in suit. And at the end of the day, he's the hero. Not because he wanted to be a hero, not because he wanted the glory, only because he was never Hashem. And he wanted to make his life as meaningful as possible by doing that which he was designated to do because of the fact that he had the ratzon to do. It was Hashem. Next week, we'll see the second half of that story, or at least the continuation of that story, and hopefully learn some more about that.